the voice of the American soccer fan.
I am a proponent of team spirit, of camaraderie.
The United States of Soccer with Jason Davis.
American soccer fans unite. Back in the United States of Soccer here on a Monday. Hope you had a nice weekend. It was a busy weekend. No MLS Cup playoffs, and yet it was still a crazy busy weekend. We got more to talk about from the weekend later on the program. Right now we're going to talk a little bit about U.S. soccer, governance issues, important things. Okay, important things in regards to U.S. soccer and how they manage the sport in the United States. Chris Kessell is a board member for the West Virginia Soccer Association. He's on the phone line with us now. As one of the people who has proposed an amendment to U.S. Soccer's bylaws. Chris, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. So I've tried to frame this up. I want people to understand this. I imagine you've talked a lot about it. So give us just a thumbnail sketch on the issue that you saw and what this proposal is meant to accomplish.
So the current way that voting is handled for the professional council when you go to the U.S. Soccer AGM. That's elections, that's changes to the policy manual, that's changes to the bylaws. You know, every group of the professional council, the athlete council, you know, that a lot of people have heard about, the youth council and the adult council has a certain percentage of the vote. And within the professional council, currently, the men's first division is given 300% of the voting weight of the women's first division. There isn't currently a second or third division for women's professional soccer in the United States. And during the last year's AGM in Phoenix, we were sitting there. They put the graphic up on the screen, and it was just shocking when we saw how those votes were weighted. And we felt that within West Virginia Soccer, our delegation was sitting there, and we talked amongst ourselves, and we just felt that having women's professional soccer weighted so disproportionately to men's soccer, you know, when it comes to picking leadership, to setting, you know, policy and how we're going to grow and continue forward in American soccer, it just wasn't right. And we just decided to do something about it.
Now, explain the process here. I mean, again, I know this is kind of getting in the weeds on how U.S. soccer runs, Chris, but it's important for us to know the process here, the proposed amendment, and then what needs to happen for it to be enacted.
Okay, so what we did is we proposed a policy amendment. So there are two things that happen. There are U.S. Soccer's bylaws, which talk about how the organization is managed. And then there is also what's called a policy manual, and that's what sets the policy, you know, the really, you know, in-depth things about how things run. And what we did is we proposed a policy, and those require just a simple majority, 50% plus one vote from the National Council. That's everybody added together when you go to the national meeting. Whereas a bylaw requires a two-thirds majority to have it win. So we proposed a policy change, and what it's going to do is it's going to establish going forward how the votes within the professional council are weighted, meaning that first division leagues will be equal, second division leagues will be equal, and third division leagues will be equal when it comes to gender. So if in the future, currently, like I said, there is no second or third, so, you know, a second division league of, you know, women's professional soccer league would have the same amount of voting weight, you know, going forward. And what's going to happen is in December, there is a U.S. Soccer board meeting. That's Carlos Cordero and the board. And what they'll do is they'll take this up, and if they want to see this policy enacted, they'll vote and approve it there, and then when the AGM comes in February in Nashville, it'll come up for affirmation, and then everybody will say, yes, we're for that, and it'll pass with flying colors. And if they decide at the board level that they don't want to pass it, it'll still come up for vote at the AGM, and it'll come up for discussion, and it'll be just like Congress, and there'll be a big vote, and if we get a simple majority, then it'll pass and be enacted.
Okay. Talking to Chris Kessell from the West Virginia Soccer Association, a board member with that group, and trying to fix an inequality in the voting weight for the professional council at U.S. Soccer. And Chris, what's been the response here? I mean, obviously from U.S. Soccer membership, that's obviously important. But have you heard from anybody in leadership as well?
Yes, we've actually been talking to a lot of people, and the response has been actually really positive. A lot of people involved with leadership within U.S. Soccer feel like this is a discussion that absolutely needs to happen. And we've been talking to members of the Athlete Council, and a lot of people really feel like this is going to pass. And it's important to a lot of people, to make sure that, that women are equitably represented within U.S. Soccer. Mm-hmm. And I think that right now is the time to make it happen.
Look, in general, women's the leadership for women's soccer in the United States. I mean, whether you're in a position to speak to it on an intimate level, I don't know, Chris. But I'm just curious what you think. This policy change makes sense, but is there enough? So, are there enough voices out there in the women's game at the top levels to represent women's soccer in the United States, even beyond voting weight?
Well, there are fantastic leaders in U.S. Soccer. I know that a lot of people, including myself, are very critical of how the game is managed in this country. And the thing is the voices that do exist, the women that are in leadership positions within the organization and the organizations that make up U.S. Soccer are some of the most brilliant people that I've ever met and are great leaders. And right now, where women's soccer doesn't have the megaphone of a powerful vote within the organization, mm-hmm. and many of the other organizations that are led by women don't have the powerful megaphone of having big-time votes, they are being suppressed within the organization. So even if they were amazing, you're not going to have them have the ability to lead to their capabilities because they have such a small percentage of say when it comes to. So you have to listen to the man in the men's sport because they have 300% more voting power.
Right. I don't know that the whys of this matter so much as long as there's support to get it done. But uncovering, how these structures are sort of why they're in place, Chris, that obviously is important just in general to making sure that we have equitable representation at the national level for the game of soccer.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I mean, the why that we ended up here is, oftentimes not known. I mean, like the people that have been involved with the sport for 20, 30, 40 years have, gradually gotten us to here. And if you like myself, I have only been involved with governance in West Virginia soccer, for a few years, and I've been running a club here in West Virginia for a few years longer than that. So, like, every day I find something new out. Like I said, when I was sitting at the AGM and I saw that graphic pop up there, I was taken aback. I was just like, I had no idea that this, even though I knew how things worked, every day you find something new, and if it's not, you have to stand up and try to fix the things. And I think that this year we're going to see it get done.
Now, the U.S. Soccer, you mentioned U.S. Soccer's response, or at least some of the leadership response, and people within the federation saying that this is a conversation that needs to happen. Do you think this is tied to a broader sense that there's some inequity there? Obviously, you have right now the equal pay fight with the U.S. Women's National Team. That's the highest level. This is about the professional league necessarily, but it's also sort of in general a question about the women's soccer's place in U.S. soccer. Is this a part of that broader conversation in terms of the response?
It's 100% a part of that broader conversation, and like I mentioned earlier, that this conversation, if you think about it, would this be happening the way that it's happening now if women's soccer had been given an equitable voice throughout the last several decades, the lifetime of U.S. soccer? With the men's the leadership being so, weighted towards the men's side of the equation, would we be here? Would we be having this equitable pay conversation if we would have had equitable power, given to women's soccer and women involved with leadership in U.S. soccer over the last few decades? And I don't think we would have. And that's one of the things that I think is, having people so interested in having this conversation and this vote and moving in this direction. Because, most people involved with soccer in America want to see it done the right way, and they want to see it fair, and they want to see inclusion and taking steps like allowing people to take steps like this, when it comes to being a voter, is allowing them to help push us in that direction.
Yeah, Chris, do you feel as though at this point, and having been to the AGM and having seen some of how these things work, do you obviously there's a lot of people in the room. It's a lot of different voices. People come from different perspectives. There was some discontent, obviously, over the presidential election when Carlos Cordero was elected. Do you feel as though the membership of U.S. Soccer has a grasp on the biggest issues that the Federation faces and is pulling in the right direction?
So there's two different things going on there. I think that a lot of people do have a grasp of some of the major problems. I think most people do. But I think that one of the things is that they didn't really understand until the Carlos Cordero presidential election 2 years ago really how things worked. Most people, as they move up the levels and they get to the U.S. side, to be on leadership there, they've only looked down. Like, I run a club, and before I got involved with the state organization, I looked at my club. I was the top of it. I looked down. These are all of my concerns. So then when I moved up, I was like, okay, now I can't only worry about myself, but I continue to look down. But when I started going to the AGM, I was like, okay, we're really a part of this. I have to look up also. I have to say, this is our place. What has to change above us to help really deal with what's below, equal with me and below me in the organizational structure? And I think before that election, people were still super concerned about, this is what's below me. This is all I'm really concerned about. How is everything going to directly affect me? And I think now, over the last 2 years, we're seeing lots and lots more people. I'm having great conversations with people all the time. Obviously, we're out, talking and trying to get people to vote for this now. Having more great conversations with people that are more concerned with what above them can they help change so that it will help everybody in the whole organization. And I think that it's great. And, having conversations on big, broad topics like this policy change that we're trying to affect is making people have these conversations. This is how we fit in. These are really the things that we're here to change and fix. And hopefully it's going to continue the momentum and the groundswell of grassroots people who want to change the organization and change how soccer works in the United States to lift their voice and actually fight for change.
Chris, you also, and talking to Chris Kessell, coach, club, manages a club in West Virginia, member of the West Virginia Soccer Association Board. You ran for Vice President of U.S. Soccer, Chris, and I can't believe it took me this long to get to this point. Obviously, Cindy Parlow-Cone won that election. I'm curious about your thoughts on that process, going through your candidacy for Vice President, how you were received, and ultimately where we are with that leadership after you lost that election.
Well, so the thing about the election process is with the professional council and the athlete council controlling 45% of the vote, it's very easy for them, if they want something to happen, for it to happen. With Cindy Parlow-Cone being a former athlete, national team member, great person from all accounts, that was the choice of those two groups of people, and their weighted vote was impossible to overcome. And the unfortunate thing about that process is it showed me from talking to people that they are super leery when the entirety of those two biggest voices are on one side of an issue, they don't want to speak up on the other side of it. And with MLS and USL, controlling the vast majority of, the professional council vote, it's very easy for, men's soccer to throw their weight around. And hopefully, in addition to this equitable treatment of women's soccer in America, it'll open up the professional council, to hearing more voices and being interested in hearing new ideas and new people, and will change the way that these elections work.
Okay. Let's hope for the best. It's Chris Kessell from the West Virginia Soccer Association proposing an amendment to the policies at U.S. Soccer to allow for equal representation in the professional council between men's and women's professional leagues. Chris, best of luck with this. Thank you very much. We'll look for an update from you at some point in the future.
All right. Thanks for having me on today.
Here goes Chris Kessell on the program. When we come back, we'll talk about the U.S. women's national team